Lovely. Well, hello and welcome to the Chartered Institute of Fundraising London and South East Region's virtual First Thursday, which in January is on the second Thursday, just to keep you on your toes. And today we're delighted to offer you a masterclass on individual giving and how to avoid the most common mistakes that people make. My name is Julia Ellis. I chair the London and South East Committee. I'd like to say a big thank you to all the CIF volunteers who have been busily beavering away behind the scenes, working on bringing you today's event. And we are all dedicated to promoting excellence in fundraising. We will be recording this morning's event, so please do anonymise yourself if you so wish. And we'd absolutely love it forever if you would tweet about the event and tag our speaker at FR Detective and us at CIOF London SE. That would just be fab. Finally, for those of you who aren't yet members of the Chartered Institute, then just for attending today's session, I can offer you a discount code, which will also be on the screen at the end of the session, which is LDN/group, which will give you a whopping £49 off your first annual membership. You'll have access to discounted rates of future events, including fundraiser convention and training courses and qualifications, as well as members-only guidance and direct support from our policy team, plus a ton of other benefits. So we do hope you join. And also, I meant to say earlier, we do have a number of vacant roles on our committee. It's a great team. We're all really, they're all fab. I can say we, they're all really fab. So if you're interested in doing a bit of work for the Institute, it would be lovely, and please do get in touch. And I'm now going to hand over to Stephen, one of our lovely volunteers, who's going to talk about some housekeeping rules.
Hi everyone, and thanks for joining today. I'll keep this very brief, but just let you know, everyone will be on mute for the whole of this session today. But if you have any sort of problems or questions that you can't hear the sound or anything, please do put that in the chat function, and we will try to resolve it as soon as possible. We will be holding a Q&A session towards the end. So throughout Craig's talk, shall I say, please do pop your questions into the Q&A function, and we'll try and answer as many as we can. Yes, please do make the most of the session, and I will hand back to Juliet.
Thanks, Stephen. So I'm delighted to introduce our speaker today. Craig Linton, aka the Fundraising Detective, has been raising income for charities for over 20 years at organisations such as Ryder and Amnesty International. He wrote the critically acclaimed Friends for Life, a practitioner's guide to relationship fundraising, and helps fundraisers reach their full potential in his work as a speaker, trainer and facilitator. Outside of work, and many moons ago, he appeared on the cover of a Hong Kong magazine dressed as David Hasselhoff, as you do, and can also claim to have scored a goal at the Bernabeu, which, for those who don't know anything about football, which included me when he first told me, is where Real Madrid play. So that's some claim to fame. Anyway, without further ado, I shall hand you over to Craig now. Thanks, Craig.
Morning, everyone, and don't worry, there'll be no Baywatch theme tune singing or any of the like, and there'll be no fancy dress in this presentation today, I can assure you. But what I want to do just straight away, because I know time is quite tight and precious, I'm going to show you two videos now. I just want you to watch them both, and there's no agenda, there's no tricks here. Just two DRTV ads from Greenpeace, so a great organisation. And at the end, I've got two questions for you.
The pristine Arctic, home of the polar bear. As climate change destroys their habitat, polar bears face a massive crisis. And as the Arctic melts, big oil companies are racing to exploit its resources. Now horrific oil spills are the threat. SMS Arctic 1 to 1234567 to stop this. Greenpeace is fighting to defend the Arctic from destruction. Help us protect the polar bear's home before it's too late. SMS Arctic 1 to 1234567 to demand a global sanctuary and save the Arctic. Join the movement now.
As the Arctic melts, the rush to exploit its resources is starting. Nobody will listen to her, but they'll listen to you. Join the movement. Save the Arctic.
So we've got 2 videos on the same subject, saving the Arctic. We've got a quick poll question for you. We've got 2 questions. Don't know if we can get the first one up. The first one up is, just very simply, of the 2 videos, which one did you like most? Yeah, so that's pretty typical. When I ask that question and show these videos, you know, the vast majority prefer the second one, the polar bear in London, and you know, the Jude Law voiceover and the you know, the Radiohead soundtrack, etc. So the second question now is more from a fundraising perspective. Which video do you think raised the most money? So yeah, so much closer, and yeah, so we've got 60% now saying the first one they thought would raise more money. So yeah, so the first big mistake that we often see is we do what we like, not necessarily what works best. So the majority of people liked the Polar Bear in London video best, but actually it was the Arctic one that uses all those classic DRTV techniques and uses all those you know, emotional buttons to get people to respond. And as fundraisers and individual givers, that's what we want to do. So the second one, if we sort of move on to slide 7, is this idea that I often see fundraisers using stats over stories. And for me, the biggest mistake that fundraisers make is to follow up a really powerful, emotional story with facts and figures. And this is not how people, so yeah, so the biggest mistake, and I've emphasized this and made it all twirly, is that fundraisers follow up emotional, powerful stories with facts and figures. And this is not how people work. You know, Mother Teresa said, if I look at the masses, I will never act. But if I look at the individual, I will. And there's a very famous experiment called the Ryder experiment. People were shown the following 2 pieces of information. First one, around food shortages, you know, 3 million children, severe rainfall deficits, 42% drop, 3 million face hunger, 11 people in Ethiopia need help. You know, it's a big number. I mean, this is a huge problem. We must do something about it. It's urgent and a desperate situation. People were then shown this is Ryder. Her life would be changed for the better as a result of your financial gift. You know, you can help save the children, work with Ryder's family and other members. So when you looked at that big problem, you know, the millions of people, people were then given the choice, do you want to help the millions or do you want to help Ryder? And more than double was donated to help Ryder when there was an identifiable person than when we used abstract facts. So twice as likely to help when we feel empathy for an individual. They did lots and lots of different experiments around this. And one of the most interesting ones was they primed people ahead of asking this, and they asked the maths questions. So they basically said something like, what's 25 plus 50? And get people's brain into a statistical frame of mind. And they asked another group, what do you feel when you hear the word baby? So they primed them emotionally. And you can see when they told Ryder's story and asked people to think about babies, giving went up massively. But when they primed them with maths first, before saying, right, it went back down to the similar sort of giving levels as when people were given statistics and given the big numbers. So we're tempted to use stats in it, and I'm not saying never use stats. There's a time and a place for stats, and there's lots of research about when stats are appropriate and how to make stats more compelling and part of the story. But for most of us, we're going to be better off if we use emotion and lead with emotion and tell a story. Because one of the things that is funny in fundraising and with human nature is that overall level of giving, it doesn't bear any relationship to the likely social payoff of how much raised, or indeed the amounts raised. There's a movement, Pete Seeger, you might have heard of. He died last year, but he founded the effective philanthropy movement about give to where your most pound will have the biggest difference. And actually, it's quite a niche cause. And actually, people don't give rationally, they give emotionally. So you'll often see stories like this in the media. This was a couple of years ago, 2018. It's a very sad case of a video of a boy being bullied on the way home from school, a Muslim boy, Mohammed. Really horrible bullying. And someone said, this is not acceptable. We're going to show Mohammed that people care. We're going to help his family, help his education. And this boy raised 157,000. Now there's probably tens of thousands of children being bullied around the UK who could all do with this help. But it's the fact that this video went viral, it was emotional, it was powerful. People wanted to help that one person, Mohammed. So I get this. You can see this in more extremes. A couple of years ago, the Archers, a fictional character. So not real. There was a domestic abuse storyline in the Archers, and someone said, oh, let's raise money for Helen in the Archers. And people rallied round. There's a Just Giving page. And, again, across the country at that time, sadly, there will be thousands of women who Refuge will have been helping, who nobody would, were thinking about or caring about or giving money to. But because it was put into the spotlight because of the Archers, people give to this fictional character. And again, £170,000 doing. So people like to give to that individual, bring it back down to that one patient, that one researcher, that one animal even. Because my last story is about a dog. And this was a dog that lived on a tanker that was almost like the ship's mascot. And it crossed the Pacific Ocean. And there was a fire on this tanker in the middle of the ocean, 500 miles off the coast of Hawaii. So in the middle of nowhere, middle of the night, in the commotion, helicopters sent out to rescue the crew. And guess what? They left the dog. I mean, how sad is that? They left the dog. And this dog was basically filmed wandering the deck on this now ghost ship that was, going to just sink at some point, and the poor dog was going to drown. You thought, well, that's sad, but, there's no way we could justify, spending £150,000 to go and rescue this dog. Oh, yes. The money was raised within like an hour to rescue this dog, to put a rescue mission together to get this dog. You can see there from the Hawaiian Humane Society, you can see the layer on it around its neck. They spent, £150,000 to go and rescue this dog, and everybody felt good. It makes no rational sense whatsoever. So that's the second thing. Don't assume people are rational. Make sure that you're telling a compelling, emotional story. The third mistake that I often see is that pictures don't support the message that you're saying in your individual giving. The imagery doesn't support the message you're getting across. So as an extreme example, if you saw this picture with the headline, "Please help these sad, neglected children," you're going to be thinking, well, they don't look particularly sad or neglected. So it creates this dissonance, this cognitive disconnect when the pictures don't necessarily match. So if you're telling a sad story, make sure the picture that is supporting that shows the need, shows the support. You can do before and after, and when you get to the point of, because of you've done this great, amazing thing to help, you can show the difference. But think back to that first Arctic ad showing the oil spill, showing the problem visually in a way that, oh, I get that, and then showing the polar bear looking sad, and the imagery supported the narrative, and you need to make sure your imagery does. So when you see a headline like this, the imagery needs to support that. And not only does the imagery need to support it, one of my biggest bugbears, I'm sure I'm becoming a grumpy old man, is the lack of captions on photos. And this is such a missed opportunity. When we use a photo in a newsletter, on a poster, in an advert, you want to use a caption, because that's one of the most read areas, and it should be used to emphasize some of your key points and to get across what you're trying to say. So use captions on your imagery as well. And the next thing is, you might have told a great story, and you might have got the imagery right, and it's really hitting the mark. But sometimes, or often, you see individual giving that it's not clear what you're asking for. What's my role here? What do you need me to do to give and to make a difference? So you can tell this great a story, but if there's no call to action, if there's no fundraising offer, then it's not going to raise any money. So I just want to show a couple of classic fundraising offers for you. So here's one from the lifeboats, heel face, 30-foot waves, blizzards, force 9 gales and sub-zero temperatures. All we ask of you is £15. Clear, direct, give us your money. That's from Sophie. The next one's from Sophie as well. Make a blind man see, £10. And this is just reproduced so you can actually read it. This is all about cataract operations in India at the time, India and Africa at the time. This is from the 90s, I think, early 90s. What's your equivalent? It can be really hard if you're, you're a research charity, or you don't have services like this, but there will be something that you can do to try and get out. What is our offer? What are we asking here? How do we break down the need to something that people can quickly get and see that they're making a difference? Here's a really simple one from the other year. I think Christian had over 1 million people text in. Text £1, buy a net, save a life. Couldn't be clearer in terms of the offer and what they're asking there. So take time to think through when you're working on your individual giving. We've got a great story, we've got great imagery to support it. Let's make sure we've got an offer that works as well. So the next point is, it can often be hard to read or hard to view. So here's an example. I'm going to show you this. See how your eyes react to this image, and see how easy it is to read on your screen. White on a sort of greyish white, it's really difficult to read that. You can read the bring and the and the to, but the other sense, the inspiration and the athlete, is so difficult to read. And there's lots of evidence and research on readability and design. For example, on typefaces, using serif fonts and sans serif and all uppercase typical things, those are the most easy to read. The comprehension is at 92%. You start using italics and all caps, it starts dropping down rapidly, and then until you get the bottom, anything that you write in cursive script, all capitals, 75, 3 out of 4 people who are reading that are going to really struggle to take it in and comprehend it. So think about the fonts that you use and how you do it. Colin Wheeldon did some really interesting research, about how to justify your text, and actually, flush left and right is the easiest to read. There's a real big trend at the minute to center text. I see it across companies, charities, in emails, lots of text being centered. It's really, really difficult to read big blocks of centered text. It's hard on the eyes. So keep it to an absolute minimum, because if people can't read it, or it's hard to read what you're writing, they're not going to give. Same with reverse out text. It's another bugbear of mine, as we saw on the poster. As soon as you start reversing out text, from a design point of view, it can look lovely. And I think there's cases to put headlines or pull out boards, or use it sparingly. But for big blocks of text, black on white, as boring as that may seem, is what works best for individual giving. Same with coloured tints. Red is a really hard colour to read. So is green. Yellow, they don't even bother because it's so difficult. But yeah, black on white, comprehension level is much higher when you use that. And finally, just a little bit on tints as well. As soon as you start tinting things, it makes it more difficult to read. So again, just think about, you've got your offer, you've got your story, you've got your emotion. Don't spoil it by not making it really simple to read. And font size matters. Again, going back to that first point about audience, certainly for direct mail, or if you're doing or press ads, or even on your website, making sure that the font size is 12 or even 14. Every time I've done a split test with small versus large font always outperforms the small text. So it's worth going to size 14 is what I would recommend most of the time. And then the final thing is making sure you make it easy to give. So again, from Sophie, I love this example from Greenpeace in Portugal. What's the problem with that response device? Just take a look at it. You don't have to understand Portuguese, it's just a fundamental problem. How many of you have a white pen? Yeah, the days of using Tipex have gone these days. So people couldn't respond because people didn't have a white pen to be able to fill in the form. And it's very easy to laugh at these examples, but actually it's very easily done. I won't name and shame here, but big charity that I had a friend working at, they're having this huge campaign. It was launching with DRTV, and for some reason it got delayed, and it ended up launching on a Saturday. No one remembered to tell the call centre, and it was closed on a Saturday, and they had thousands of hundreds of people ringing up the call centre to give, and it was closed. So they lost all this money because they hadn't talked to each other, hadn't made it easy to give. This is one from me. This is over 10 years ago. What's wrong with this envelope? Actually, there's nothing wrong with it, in the fact that Royal Mail at the time had brought out this new thing where you could just write a single free post on and it would get there. But people hadn't seen it before, and so people didn't trust the envelope would arrive. So what happened is we took loads of calls from people. Is this envelope right? Is that all the address needs to be? And for every person who rang, there'll have been 20 who just didn't trust it and didn't bother making the donation. And although technically right, it's why we always encourage people to test with a fresh pair of eyes. Get a partner to look at it, or your mum or your dad, or someone. How do they react to it? And if we'd have done that, we might have seen that, oh yeah, actually people don't trust that envelope. We actually need a full address. And then finally, your web page. This is a web page that's great. There's a great article that I put a link into. But is your donation page on your website? Is it easy to find? Is it easy to fill in? There's no annoying boxes that are mandatory that confuse people. Take time to audit your donation process every 6 months or so. Is it still working? Is it still delivering? And there's some great tips on that. So what we've gone through today, we talked about storytelling, we talked about emotion, talked about the audience and data a little bit, about making things easy to read, having a clear offer, and the response mechanism. So I talked about sharing a model with you, and when you rearrange this magically, it becomes RESPOND, respond. So if you get all these things right in your individual giving, you will get response from your supporters. It's been a really quick run through. So here's the 6 things to avoid. Remember, you're not the audience. Put yourselves in your supporters' shoes and make sure it works for them. It's not about what you like, it's about what works. Remember to don't use stats over stories. Start with your story, start with the emotional, make that work first. Make sure the images that you use are supporting the sort of story. Make sure you've got a real concrete offer and it's easy to read and absorb. And then obviously your response form is easy to give. So thanks for your time. Thanks for bearing with us through the problems. Apologies for that. I'm glad we got there in the end. And very open to the Q&A. I can see some things coming in. Thanks for your time and patience.
Yeah. Perfect, Greg. Thank you. That was so interesting. I think I can speak for everybody when I say I feel like I've picked up some really useful tips to take away already. We have got a few questions in the Q&A. So the first is, are these examples for a cold or warm audience?
So obviously the DRTV was acquisition. I'm just trying to think what other examples were in there. There was a mix of things actually. So the Greenpeace one was obviously acquisition because it was off the page. Same with all the offer ones. They were more. So most of them in here were acquisition. The same things apply exactly to warm as well. You need to still. You might get away with it a little bit more because people are really committed and they love your cause and they're already giving, but you will not suffer by being really clear and making a really strong offer and remembering those tips.
Perfect, thank you. And another question, so if asking for a small amount, so say £1, what would you expect the average gift to be?
Well, if you're referring, Vicky, to the Christian Aid ad, it was an SMS, so it was a fixed £1 donation. There's a slide that I took off that Blue Frog for many years, really great agency. They used a card where you could put pound coins in or £2 coins in, and you often found people topped up a donation on top of that. So it's very hard to give an exact answer, but most people will give more than £1 when you ask. So I'd expect the average gift to be much higher than the actual pound. Yeah.
Perfect, thank you. And we've got another comment and question, so saying thank you so much for an insightful presentation. And they wondered, what year was the copywriting and text format study in the USA conducted?
So there's 2 big studies. There was a guy called, he died I think recently, Professor Bergler, German guy, and a lot of that research was done in I think the 50s and 60s. So this has been around a long time. And then there was, I think, an Australian guy called Colin Wheeldon who redid the studies in the 80s and 90s and found exactly the same results. And there's been more studies done in recent years that have backed it up. There is some research that the serif, non-serif online isn't as important as it is offline. You know, so newsletters, newspapers, you pick up any newspaper around the world, they will all use the serif font because it's easy to read, and the hats on it supposedly you can track, but online and on screen it's meant to be a bit more difficult. So I hope that helps.
Perfect, thank you. So by adding a monetary value to the call to action, so e.g. help a blind man see for £10, do you run the risk of missing out on higher value gifts?
Yeah, you try and tailor it. So if it's a warm appeal and you had different segments, you would find, well, okay, these people normally give 100. Well, what's our £120 equivalent? So you might ask them, you know, if you look at Crisis at Christmas, they do brilliantly. They say you can pay a meal for one person for say £27.32, or you can pay for a table of 10 for £272.32. So you scale it and you give people the opportunity. People actually like things bundled together. It makes it very easy to comprehend. So you could ask people to give one blind man for 10 or 5 for 50 or 10 for 100, rather than trying to find 3 different things. You scale it up depending on the donor's level. Yes.
Perfect. Another question here also to say thanks for a super interesting session. They'd be interested to know whether yourself or any of the charities you've worked with have had issues with the ethics of framing a single identified beneficiary as a victim for the purpose of fundraising.
Yeah, this is a brilliant question, Charlotte, and I think that is absolutely crucial. So it is. I don't have any easy answers, but I think anything that others or that diminishes power and that white saviorism, that's a discussion for another time and day. But absolutely anything that we're not saying here that it needs to be that poverty porn, flies on the eyes type thing that none of us want to see, I think, in this day and age. But the fact is, the story, even if it's empowering, you can still tell the story about one person in an empowering way that with dignity and is ethical. So it applies. It's all about the power of one, and you need to do it in a way that fits with your charity's mission and the ethics, and make sure that it is you're not doing that. But yeah, I think it's a really important point to make. So thank you.
Perfect. We've got another question. So could you give some examples or thoughts on the best way to use stats?
So make it real. So so say for example, you heard me talk about football earlier. So when I worked for a blind charity, we knew there was 30,000 blind people in London, and we could tell you could help one of 30,000 blind people in London by giving. Well, actually, what we said is you could, that would fill the Albert Hall every night for a week. So bring the stat to light. Make it relative. Find something that makes it relevant to their thing. So I'm doing something with the children's charity at the minute. We're saying 3 out of every 4 children in a classroom would have this particular problem and issue to give. So you need to try and help the stats tell a story. So again, so how do you make the stats part of the story if you can use them? Because people just struggle with big numbers and struggle with processing that and picturing it. So help them paint a picture in the mind. Use stats to paint the picture is how I would say to do that.
Perfect. Thanks, Craig. And if your organisation funds research on an issue and you don't have any direct funds to beneficiary, is it okay to make up a fictional beneficiary to use in your fundraising material?
Yeah, I think it's another really good question. One of the things I see a lot of charities do is what we call composite case studies, and say this is based on real stories, but we've changed some of the facts and we've changed this to do it. So I think as long as you're clear and as long as you tell people up front, this is a hypothetical example of how it might help, then yes, I do think it is okay. But again, it's all about just being open, honest, and transparent. And I think there's ways you can do that help you tell that story.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And another question: do you think DM appeals being unbranded, more like a personal letter than something with lots of charity brand design, get better results?
So again, really good question, Karen. There was something on the Agitator blog, I think a week or 2 ago, about envelopes and how do you get people to open envelopes. So I guess this is a little bit similar to that. And I think what their researchers said is if you don't have an amazing teaser that intrigues and makes people want to open it, then you're much better just leave it unbranded and make it look like a personal letter, because a bad outer is worse than just a plain letter. But a really strong outer that has those key elements that makes you, wonder what this is all about, and open it, will probably outperform the unbranded. Certainly for higher value as well, where you might be using a live stamp, you might be handwriting the envelopes, then anything that you can do like that to personalize it will be really, really powerful.
Great. And another question: so do you have any tips for digital ad when copy is limited and users only spend a few seconds looking at these ads?
Yeah, good question, Becky. Now, I challenge this, and I've actually seen some incredible results from long copy digital ads. And I've got an example of this is from a business that was a 300-line long Facebook advert at the most extreme, and it worked. So done, and I've also seen them flop as well. So I don't want you to go away and suddenly do like massive long digital ads, but have a test. I've seen certainly for individual giving appeals, a long copy version of the ad has outperformed short copy versions. If you're telling a story, if it makes it compelling, I want to know about this person, I want to read about the next sentence, what's happening, then the long copy can actually work on digital. But we know digital's tough. You need to make sure you have the imagery right and the video to support it, because that's what's going to make people stop scrolling. You still need the headline to get people to stop. But yeah, you either need to quickly intrigue people to go and read more or click through, or don't be afraid to test some longer copy as well.
Great. And can I ask your thoughts on using actors to tell real stories in a campaign to protect vulnerable people? Do you feel this undermines the campaign?
I think we need to give supporters and donors more credit, and I think they understand why we might sometimes need to use actors, certainly when children are involved and stories of abuse and things like that. So yeah, I think donors aren't stupid, and actually again, you still need to, if the story's right, and I think you upfront and say actors are representing this. You see it all the time on some DRTV ads. You look at Macmillan ads, you look at CRUK ads, DRTV, they all use actors, and clearly often use actors for things, and they're still massively successful. So if you've got the story right and you've got the imagery right, then I think actually it shouldn't make too big a difference, I think, Emily. But I think it's a question worth considering, and the preference should always be to try and use real stories and real people, but there's times obviously when that isn't appropriate and applicable.
Great, Craig. And I've also got my I've got another question come through. So any specific advice for faith-based charities? So a local charity working in primary schools supporting the Christianity stream of the NAC curriculum. Yeah, national curriculum.
Yeah, so root your story in faith and appeal to people's, what is it about your charity? What are the values? What are the things that you believe in and stand for? Share them, tell people why this is important work. Try and connect to them on a values level and on their identity. So as a Christian, using overt language like that, as someone who believes, or as someone who has these innate values and beliefs and appeal to that. And there'll be different types of there's lots of ways to express your faith and whatever religion you are, but trying to find out what is it about their faith and Christianity that would make them want to support the work that you're doing in schools. So that would be my tip on that one.
Great. And another question, do you have any tips on how to negotiate with comms and brands team around having copy that feels more real and personal than having to always use brand messaging?
I mean, there's a great topic for another session in the future, I think. I think it's a tough one, but I think it's about involving them early. It's about understanding their needs as well as your needs as well, and making sure that you probably all want the same things. And the other thing is, I'd involve the person whose story it is. If they're happy, I tend to find we get more hung up about stories and how they're portrayed than the people who are telling the story. They wouldn't share their story if they weren't happy for you to use it. And no one talking. So I would always encourage you to involve them early and to make them feel part of the process and try and show them the difference. One of the great ways I always use is use a test or a pilot and show the difference. And you can do that quite cheaply now with things like Facebook ads. Get the comms messaging versus your personalized messaging and show them the difference it makes, because I'm almost certain it will make a difference.
Great, thanks, Craig. And I've got a final question to add into the mix for myself. So looking back at the videos, do you think a factor in the amount of money raised could be the call to action? So I noticed that one video had an SMS call to action and the other was a hashtag or a website link. Do you think that could have contributed towards the lower income?
Yeah, absolutely. And these weren't the finished versions that actually went out. These were like the initial scam. So it would have gone out with the website on, and it would have, you know, if you look at both of them, would have had an SMS in the final version that went out. So looking at Save the Arctic got 2,738 SMSs, and Paula Bear got 706. So there was an SMS ask on the final version, but it's a good spot, Vicky. And that wasn't the reason there was an SMS ask on it when it went out, for real. Okay,
cool, perfect. Thanks, Craig. Yeah, that's all the questions. So thank you so much for answering those, and thank you for such an interesting session. We've got so many comments in the chat function about how much people have enjoyed it. So thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to pass back over to Juliet for a wrap up.
Thanks, Vicky. And thank you so much, Craig, for keeping a cool head in the face of such awful tech issues. At one point, I thought we were going to have to call the session, but thank you so much for persevering, because that was really great. And clearly from all the chat, everybody else agrees with me, and some really clear takeaways that people can start using as soon as they get to their desk after this session. So a massive thank you. Our next First Thursday event, which will be on the first Thursday, will be on the 3rd of February at 10 o'clock, where we'll be looking at involving beneficiaries in fundraising efforts. More details to follow, so please do look out for that and do join us. And in the meantime, stay safe and COVID-free, and we'll see you soon.